Hi, welcome to part 4. Today we're going to be focusing on getting authentication set up because we need to know who our users are and be able to provide them with the correct data based on who they are, and so on and so forth. Auth is definitely something that you want to get out of the way early, at least the basics of it, because so much of your app likely will be intertwined with it. So let's just source my environment here. Okay, so to get started, we do need to install a new package because we're going to be using JWT, JSON Web Token, or maybe it's JavaScript Web Token. I think it's just JSON Web Token. Let's find out. Simple JWT. There we go. It's a JSON Web Token. So this is a pretty popular way to handle authentication. Essentially, you log in and you're given back this really long, unique string that you use for your subsequent requests. And it also includes information within it, metadata essentially for when it will expire, so that you can also request a refresh token. I'm not going to get into all the details about it. There's a lot, but we'll just get at least the bare minimum to make something work. And you can, of course, explore on your own further. So I've installed that package. Next thing I want to do is go to my settings file, and we're going to set up our default authentication on REST framework. So to do that, underneath our render class, we can put default authentication classes, and we're going to use REST framework simple JWT, which is the package we just installed, .authentication, .jwt authentication. And let's just run our server. And make sure we don't have any errors. Oh, I already have something running on that port, so I'll stop that and we'll rerun it. There we go. Okay, so we have that set up now. I want to get a little bit of boilerplate out of the way. So we're going to make a new file right in our API folder called permissions.py, and we're making another one called exceptions.py. Right, so I've created this exceptions.py so that we can put in some reusable classes, essentially, to handle different types of exceptions. This is just a nice practice, and you're welcome to do this. You're welcome to do things a little more grassroots, but I think this is a pretty nice pattern. So there's different kinds of exceptions you might get, like permission errors and whatnot. We're going to set up a few for now. So I'm going to make one for just a bad request. So this might be, if the user hit an endpoint but didn't have the right parameters in its data. So we'll actually just take what it's saying right here, because that's pretty much what I want. The only difference is because it's going to be a RESTful, like JSON-based API, we want the detail to actually be something that can come back as JSON. So basically, the API exception, which is built into REST framework, we're just extending. You'll see, and we could just use, their built-in ones or their default one here, but I like to extend it and actually create our own. So we have one for bad request, and I'll paste just a few other ones in here because I don't want to waste time, typing these all out. But we have one for a conflict. We have one for an internal server error, and something, if the service is unavailable for whatever reason. So these are just nice things to have, and you can, of course, add your own, 404, all those kinds of things just to make things work. But you'll notice in Django REST framework, you usually won't need like a 404 one, because they already will, if an object isn't found, it will automatically return something just like this. So with a little more detail too. So we probably won't need that one, but we'll come back to it if we have to. Similarly, I just want to set up some sort of default permissions. So we're going to import the base permission from REST framework. And we're going to just create a class, essentially kind of like an abstract class that we will be extending, called API permission. I'll explain this in a moment. And we're going to make a few different options here. And permissions are basically how you can decorate our views in the various requests with what permissions are required to actually get data to interface with it. So one permission might be allow any. And in an API permission, which is extending base permission, there's this function we can override, this method called hasPermission. And for allow any, we're just always going to return true. We may also want another permission called isAdmin. Maybe this is only for certain people in your organization, admins basically. And what this will do is it will make sure that the request.user and the user is an admin is true. And it will default to false. So if for some reason that isAdmin isn't even set, we will just always do that. That's what the get attribute allows us to do. You pass in what the object is, what key you're looking for essentially, or what property or whatever, and then you can set a default. So we'll just default to false so that nothing goes. Another important permission is whether someone is authenticated. So this will check if there is a user in the request and the request.user is actually authenticated. I think those are good enough for now. We may add some more at some point, but I wanted to get this sort of boring stuff out of the way. This will come when we actually do some like object-based permissions in a bit. All right. Next up, we're going to start getting our auth endpoints figured out. So right inside API, I'm going to make a new folder. We're just going to call it auth. And we're going to put in a init.py in here. And then inside of auth, we're going to make also a urls.py, which we'll put in a bit. But we're going to have another subfolder in here, or really a module called token. And this is where anything to do with tokens will be done. So requesting a token or refreshing your token. So we'll put another init.py in here. And in here, we need to essentially put URLs again, because we're going to have all our URLs in a nice pattern like we've been doing so far. We're going to have views.py for the actual endpoints and serializers for the data. Okay, and then let's just, before we forget, go to our URLs, not this URLs, but the API URLs, and we're actually going to want to include API, and then, auth, and then it'll be api.auth.urls. Similarly, and I'm just going to pull this because it's going to be pretty close, within the URLs that we just made inside auth, not inside token yet, we are going to put more URL patterns. And in this case, we're going to put token. And here we'll do api.auth.token.urls. So we get that set up. Now you're seeing we're getting some errors here because we're, saving without being finished, and that's totally fine. And then in this URLs, this is where we will actually be creating the endpoints, linking up the endpoints, which we don't have yet. So let's actually make those. Let's actually start with the serializers. So for serialization, we are going to import from REST Framework serializers, and we're going to create a token create serializer. Now, this kind of serializer is going to be a little bit different. We're not actually using the model serializer like we did in, for instance, Post serializer. Let's just see. So this was a model serializer, which automatically connects with an existing model, and it does all this magic under the hood where we didn't have to do very much here, just configure what fields. Here, we have our token create serializer, and we're going to first of all require an email to be passed in, and we'll just use the email field. So a lot of these serializers have fields too, just like models, and some of them are named the same, like a char field or a number, an integer field, that kind of thing, as our Django models. But you can look up all the different ones that we have options for. There's a whole ton in there. But we also want to be asking for a password when someone's requesting a token. So we'll use serializer.char field for that. So that's our token create. We're also going to create one for refreshing. So we'll call this refresh. Or actually, let's call it, keep it the same, token refresh serializer. And we're also going to extend serializer.serializer. And in a refresh token, all we're going to be asking for is what that refresh token is, and it will use that to essentially create a new token for us. So those are our serializers. Let's get our views figured out now. All right. So there's a few things that we're going to want to install here, or not install, but a few things we need to import. So I'm just going to import them now. We're going to be importing from Django just the authenticate function, which allows us to pass in a username and password, and it does all the stuff under the hood to to salt that and compare it to the hashed version of the password stored in the database. We're also going to install import some things from REST framework, such as status, response. We're going to be doing some stuff from JWT, but we're going to alias it as JWT views just to make it very specific. We're going to be importing some settings from JWT, but we're going to name it JWT settings again, just to keep it, we know when we're talking about it in the implementation that we're talking about JWT. We're also going to import the refresh token and the token error. And then here we're importing our exceptions. That's the class we just made a few minutes ago. We're going to import the serializers that we just made a minute ago. And we're going to import this permission allow any, because when you're requesting a token, there'll be no permissions on that. Anyone can do it because we don't even know who they are until they've actually, got the token. So this is like a free open endpoint anyone can hit to try and log in. All right, so here we're going to create something called token create view. And we're going to extend JWT views dot, I don't know why it gave me that, but we're going to extend the token view base. And in our class, we can set permission classes to allow any right there. And we want to set our serializer class equal to token create serializer. Now, we're not going to have a get request. This will always be a post request because you'll be sending it as a post. And here we'll just decorate it with the things we need and kwargs. And so what we can do now is I just made the executive decision. I'm going to disable GitHub Copilot. It is kind of getting in the way of what I'm trying to talk about. But I will put it back on when I get back to work. Okay, so we want to get an instance of our serializer. And what we can do is we can go self.getSerializer. And in here, we need to pass in the actual data that the user supplied. So we would go data equals, and we can go into the request object and get the data. So the request object has a whole bunch of things in it. One of them is data, which is like your post data when you're making a form submission. So we're going to be asking for that. Then what's very important is we also have to call serialize.isValid. So this will actually validate it for us. And we want to tell it to raise an exception if there was a problem. So we'll say raise exception true. Then, and basically like if it was invalid, it'll exit out at this point, send back a response automatically. And we don't even worry about this code running. So now we know that at least we don't know whether the user was the correct email and password or anything like that yet, but we know that they actually sent up something that matches the shape of this, which is good. Then we're going to get the user. So we can go user equals authenticate. That was that built-in function we imported from Django auth. And the first parameter we need to pass in is request. So we just pass the request in. Then we need username, and that's going to be equal to, in this case, validated data.get email, because we're actually using our email as it. And I realize, sorry, it's not validated. I have to use serializer dot validated data and then dot get email. We already know it's valid. It followed, because this thing didn't go. Then we pass in as the last parameter password. And for that, it's just password. Now, if you don't run this and try to actually access the validated data, you will have an error. And that's because validated data will be empty until this actually runs. So it's kind of like, it's safe at this point. That's basically kind of the point of it. Okay, then, so this will either return a user, like our user class, or it will return none, I believe is how it works. Yeah, abstract base user or none. So what we can check is if not user, and here we can essentially raise an exception. So I'm just going to do raise exceptions dot authentication failed. And I realize this isn't actually an exception that we created, but it is built in. If we actually import it, we can go from REST framework dot exceptions import authentication failed. So we could do it this way. And then in this case, we just actually get rid of this. That's one option. But another way we could do it is actually just create this here. So we could have, class authentication failed, API exception, and we can actually, instead of extending API exception, we can actually, import this here. But it gets a little bit complicated because we'll be using the same name. So I am just going to just import it here and use sort of the default one. So we're going to raise the authentication failed, and here we can do this. So this will send the detail, no active account found with those credentials, and then we can just give this little code that it's nice to send a code along with your response so that the front end can, deal with it without parsing this, because this, for all might be localized. We want something that's a little more generic or a little more specific. Okay, so then that gives us our, we know we have a user if we got past this point. So the next thing we want to do is actually generate the refresh token. So we could just go refresh equals refresh token, which is just something that we imported, right from here. And we go for user, and we pass in that user object here. Now, some things could go wrong here, so we'll actually wrap this in a try to try and do it, and we can do an except. Admit we might get a token error is basically something we could get back. And in this case, we will raise another exception. So we're going to raise exceptions.bad request. So this is one of ours, just a bad request, and invalid token, invalid token. In the case that it didn't fail though, and we get to the very end of all this, we're just going to return a response. So response is just something built into Django REST framework, just like a generic JSON sort of response. And we pass in access, and we're going to take the refresh token.access token, and then we actually send the refresh back. And then we want to send a status saying like 200 okay, so that we know everything went well. Okay. Similarly, we're going to want a token refresh view. I'm just going to paste this one in. It's pretty similar, and I'll sort of walk through it. So in here, we're using our token refresh serializer, which again just has the refresh, and we're essentially going and trying to do basically the same logic we kind of did in here, getting the token, that kind of thing. If we have a setting set of rotating them, it'll actually rotate them here, and then we send back the token if everything went right. So didn't feel like I needed to type this one out, but this is basically what would be called when your access token is expired, but your refresh token hasn't expired yet. Generally, your refresh token will have 10 times longer of time to live on it. In the case that your refresh token is expired, that's when the user will need to log back in with this process again. Okay, so we have that. Now we just need some URLs to actually hook up here. So we're going to, as we do with most of our URLs, we're going to import path, and then we're going to go from .views, and we're going to import token create view, that's the one we just made, and token refresh view. Then we'll make some URL patterns, and these are going to be equal to, we'll have a path. If you just hit this kind of like with the /, we will just use the token create view .as view. And if you're hitting /refresh, so we'll just do refresh / then we will use the token refresh view. Okay, let's see if we missed anything. Okay, so we're still missing. We have a some issue here. Maybe I just didn't save a file. Let's step through this all. So I'm just going to close everything, and we'll start at our URLs or API. So auth api.auth.urls. And if we click on this, we'll see, okay, token api.auth.token.urls, tokens here. Okay, let's just rerun the server fully. Okay, there's still a problem. All right, and I found the error. This should just be URL patterns, not URLs patterns. That was just a silly typo. And we should be good now. Okay, so in order to test this out, this is a good time for us to talk about something called Postman. This is what I like to use, when I'm building a backend and don't have the front end ready yet. And even if I am building the front end at the same time, it's just super helpful. So Postman's like a tool for documenting your APIs and also running and executing them and testing them, basically. So I'm going to walk you through how to set this up. So we're going to make a new workspace and blank workspace. We're going to call it DJ API in my case. I'm just going to make it personal. And we have this nice empty place now. Now over here, we're going to create a new blank collection, and we're just going to name this API. Now within API, if we click this, we're going to make a new folder, and we're going to start by making the auth folder. And inside here, we'll also make another folder called token. So this kind of matches our pattern over here. We have, API, and then within API, we have auth, and then we have token. Now the names of the folders don't matter. It's just for organization purposes, but I try and keep them the same because why not? And then inside here, we're going to make a request, and we're going to call this create token. Now our create token, if you remember, is a post. And then here we would essentially do something like http://localhost 8000 /API /auth /token. And if I try and hit this, we will see, hey, it's kind of working, but it's telling us we have some problems here. So then in our body, we need to essentially put some things in here. We'll use form data in this case, and we can put email, and we can put password. And don't worry, my password is not secure at all. I don't use this password in anything for real, but I believe it was admin at my email. And then we'll put in my super secure password that I hope you'll never try. And if we try and hit this, now we get back that access token and that refresh token in this nice payload. So there we have a good chunk of auth figured out. Now let's do some configuration of Postman to make life a lot easier, because I don't want to keep copying and pasting, this whole thing. It'll get really annoying. And then if we ever change where our server is hosted or use a different port, we'd have to change everything. So what we can do over here in the environments is we can actually go click this and add a new environment. And I'll call this develop, because this is our local development environment. And we can create a variable, and I'll call this API base URL. You can call it whatever you want. And we'll set an initial value of that. I'll save this and make sure you set this environment. I always forget to actually set it after I make it. And then over here, we can actually use that variable. So I'm going to get rid of everything from here on, although I need the slash still. And then we can actually do this, and you'll see it actually will auto complete it for us. So that's super handy, because now when we make our other endpoints, we'll be good to go. Okay, so let's do that. Let's make another endpoint. So we've already made these in Django, but we're going to make a new folder. We're going to call this post, and inside here we're going to make a request, and we'll call it list posts. And here we can use that API base URL. I'll just grab this, and we'll change this to say post. And this one will be a get request, because we're just requesting data. And there we have our data back that we saw in the previous video. It's all formatted nice. It's great. So we'll have list posts, and that's good. And we can also make another one. And I'm just going to make sure I have my things saved. So let's duplicate this one, and let's rename it to retrieve post. And in here, we would pass in, an ID or something like that. So let's just see if that even works. Post ID 1. Cool. Something else we can do is we can actually use placeholders in the URL. I can actually do ID with a colon in front of it, and then it lets you put it in here. And that's just a little bit cleaner for testing and stuff, because we don't ever have to modify this URL. We just change the params there. So I can do the same thing that way, and everything will work. I could also do this with the UUID if I wanted to, basically by putting this here. Now, if I did decide to want to do it that way, I'd probably change this to say UUID, just so it's more, clear, and we can just do that. Okay, so we have that going on. However, we need to kind of set up a way we can test that our authentication is working. So we're going to quickly make just a new endpoint in our post. And this one is going to be class post me list view. And the intention here is this will be for me to get my posts, whether they're ones I've published or even ones that are in draft. So what we can do is we're going to be still extending the list model mixin and the post API view. And we will create a get, and it's going to be similar to where we did it here. The get will just give us a list view back. However, we want to make some subtle changes here. First of all, we want to make the permission class on this equal is authenticated, which I don't think we've actually imported yet. In fact, we haven't imported any. So let's go from api.permissions import. I'm going to import allow any, and I'm going to import in is authenticated. And we'll actually set allow any as sort of the default permission class here. We can do it simply like that. And then in our subclass, we can actually override it to use is authenticated for this one. Then we need to override one more thing. We need to override our get query set. So normally our get query set is just going to use this query set here, the public post query set. But instead, we actually want to use, we have another query set here called all post query set. Because in this case, we don't care. As long as it's not deleted, we are good to use it. But we need to filter it. And we need to specifically filter it where the owner is equal to self.request.user. So this will give me any posts that aren't removed, but then filter it further by ones that are logged in. So let's do that. And then we're going to go to our URLs within post. And also just right here, we're going to make a me endpoint. We're going to import our me, post me list view. And we're going to try and save. Now let's just see what happens in Postman. So we'll duplicate list posts. And I'll just rename it to list my posts. Let's try that again. And we'll just put a me right here. And if I click send, we're going to get authentication credentials were not provided. And that's because we're not doing anything with the auth yet. We created a token, sure, but we didn't even copy and paste it anywhere or do anything. So a few ways we could do this. But I will just show you right off the bat the best way to do this. So we're going to go back to our environment and we're going to edit this and we're going to add two more things. We're going to have access token, which will just be empty, and refresh token, which will just be empty by default. We'll save that. Then we're going to go to our API right here, right at the very top. And that's why I like to have this folder first, because you can just do this in one spot. And we're going to go to authorization and we're going to go to bearer token. And here we want to make the token equal to that access token variable. Okay. Then we want to make sure that most of our endpoints, and what we'll do is we'll go to post, for example, and want to look at its authorization. It should be set to inherit auth from parent. So it's going to use whatever this is and so on and so forth. And these, should also be set that same way. If you go to authorization, it's inheriting from parent. So that's great. The one thing is though, we want to make sure create token authorization does not inherit from parent because we don't actually want to send up any auth here because this is like an open request. So we're just going to do no auth for that one. Okay. And what I can do is after executing this, I can run this, I can copy this access token and let me just make sure I have all my files saved. And then I'm going to go to here and we can actually, edit the current value by clicking this. And let's just edit the current value to be that, save, go back to our list, my posts, and send it. And I made some mistake here. Oh, let's see. Okay, so let's go here. Let's just make sure access token, which is set to that. Okay, let's create token again. Maybe something strange happened. Okay, I'm going to try and grab this a little bit better and go to my settings and edit this. I wonder what happened. Boom, save. There we go. It worked that time. I think I just didn't copy it fully. So I am getting that back now, which is great. And if I wasn't logged in, so say I had authorization, temporarily turned off, like we saw before, we're going to get this error. Now we can take this, let's put this back. We can take this one step further because it is a little bit tedious every time you create a token to then go and paste it in and update it. And this is a really cool trick and I will show you how it works. And I'll try and put a snippet for, or maybe I'll actually put this Postman collection in the repo as well. But basically, let me just grab this from another project real quick. Just grabbing some little bit of code here and we'll go back here. So there's this tests tab, which allows you to sort of like execute code when you're running these things. And essentially this is like for like unit testing and stuff, but we can actually kind of use it to our advantage where we do the normal unit testing. We expect the response code to be equal to 200, meaning, it worked. And then we can actually modify that data and actually set this in our environment, whatever environment we're set to. So that's really handy because now anytime we run this, that variable will actually update. So it did change there. And if I go back here and list my posts, we'll actually see it's still working. So it's just a nice little tip. I wasted a lot of time always just copying and pasting before I learned I could do that. And it makes life a lot easier because all you have to do is hit create token and go. So we're good there. So we have list my posts. That is great. And just to prove that this is working, let's open up the Django admin. So localhost 8000/admin, and I'll probably need to log in. So let's go to posts and my first post, and let's actually set this to draft. Save and continue editing. And let's just do listing posts at the normal endpoint. And we'll actually see nothing came back because every post in our database is a draft. But if we do list my posts and hit it again, we'll actually see we are getting it because we are that user. We're able to get it back. And that's simply because we set it up that way. We said, okay, give me from all post query set, which is the one that doesn't care about whether it's published. Filter by this owner, and we're getting them back. So super handy, something important you need because a lot of the times in an app, you're going to have something that, a user wants to see in your database that publicly isn't available. All right, that's it for this chapter. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.